In my family, life was a competition, and my father was the self-appointed and very vocal referee, my older brother, Mark, the corporate lawyer who worked 80 hours a week and drove a Porsche winner, my older sister, Jessica, the brilliant surgeon who could perform a triple bypass with one hand tied behind her back, winner, and me, Maya, the middle school art teacher who spent her days covered in clay dust and glitterwell. According to my dad, every family needs a loser. I just never thought he'd announce my official title in front of the entire extended family. If you've ever felt like the odd one out, the one who chose a different path, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. My life, by my own standards, was wonderful. I taught art to 7th graders at a public middle school. It was a chaotic, messy, and deeply fulfilling job. I loved the moment of quiet. Shy kid discovered they could draw. I loved the smell of my classroom, a unique, potent cocktail of paint, clay, and teenage angst. I didn't make a lot of money, but I made a difference. I had a small, cozy apartment, a circle of wonderful friends, and a life that was rich in purpose, if not in financial assets. My siblings' lives were rich in both. Mark lived in a massive, sterile McMansion in a gated community, and his favorite topic of conversation was his stock portfolio. Jessica lived in a chic, downtown high-rise, and her favorite topic of conversation was the difficulty of finding a good nanny for her 2 perfect children. They were the embodiment of my father's definition of success: prestigious titles, big houses, and a healthy dose of socially acceptable arrogance. And my father, a man who had built a successful manufacturing business from the ground up, could not understand my choices. An art teacher, Maya, he'd say at every family dinner, his voice a familiar grumble of disappointment. Still, I just don't get it. You were the brightest of the 3 of you. You could have been anything: a lawyer, like your brother, a doctor, like your sister. Instead, you're finger painting with 12-year-olds for a living. He didn't see the value in it because it didn't come with a 6-figure salary or a fancy title he could brag about to his friends at the country club. My quiet, happy life was, in his eyes, a waste of potential. It made me the family loser, the charity case, the one they all worried about in loud, concerned voices. But there was a secret, a big one, a part of my life that I kept completely separate from my family's judgment, a secret responsibility that made their view of me as the family loser a bitter, painful irony. Her name was Eleanor Hayes, my grandmother. My grandmother was a brilliant, tough, and incredibly successful businesswoman who had built her own real estate empire in the 1970s. She was now 88 years old, and while her mind was still sharp as a tack, her body was frail. She lived in a high-end, exclusive assisted living facility, the kind with a waiting list and a price tag that looked like a telephone number, and I was the one who managed it all. Years ago, when her health began to decline, the question of her care came up. My successful, high-achieving siblings were, of course, far too busy to handle it. I'm in the middle of a massive class action lawsuit. I can't possibly deal with it. Mark had said, I'm on call at the hospital for 70 hours a week, Jessica had argued. I just don't have the time. So the duty, as it always did in my family, fell to the loser. It fell to me, the teacher with the flexible schedule and the lack of real ambition. I was the one who found the facility for my grandmother. I was the one who met with the doctors and managed her team of private nurses. And most importantly, I was the one my grandmother had trusted to hold her power of attorney. I was the sole trustee of the Eleanor Hayes Family Trust, a massive, complex financial entity set up to pay for her extensive, around-the-clock care and to manage her considerable assets until her passing. So, while my family saw me as the poor art teacher, I was quietly managing a multi-million-dollar trust fund. I was signing checks for amounts larger than my own annual salary to pay for my grandmother's care. I was making investment decisions with her financial advisors. I was the one holding all the real, tangible power in the family, and they had absolutely no idea. I never told them. I did it out of love and a deep sense of duty to my grandmother, who had always been the one person who championed my childish dreams. And frankly, I did it because I knew they couldn't handle the truth. They would have been resentful, jealous, and would have immediately started trying to get their hands on the money. So I kept my secret. I continued to play the role of the family loser. I would speak to my grandmother on the phone every night. Her mind had good days and bad days, but her love for me was a constant. "How are they treating you, my little songbird?" she'd ask, her voice a frail whisper. "They're fine, Grandma." I'd lie. "Everyone is fine." The annual family reunion, a big, boisterous barbecue held at my parents' house, was just a week away. I was dreading it. I knew it would be the usual spectacle. A 3-hour performance of "Aren't Mark and Jessica Amazing?" with a special guest appearance by "Isn't It a Shame About Poor Maya?" The night before the reunion, I spoke to my grandmother. She was having a lucid day. "You be strong tomorrow, you hear me," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "You are stronger than all of them put together. Don't you ever let them make you feel small." Her words were a balm to my anxious soul. But as I prepared for the next day, for the onslaught of my family's judgment, I felt that familiar, weary resignation settle over me. I was tired of being the loser. I was tired of playing a part. I just had no idea that my father was about to give a performance so cruel, so public, that it would finally give me the strength to walk off the stage for good. The annual Hayes family reunion was my father's favorite day of the year. It was his personal victory lap, a day for him to survey his domain and showcase his successful offspring to our entire extended family of aunts, uncles, and cousins. The event was always a loud, chaotic barbecue in my parents' sprawling backyard, and the air was always thick with the smell of grilled meat and unspoken competition. I arrived with a pit of dread in my stomach, as I always did. The party was already in full swing. My brother, Mark, was holding court by the grill, regaling our uncles with a dramatic story about a recent courtroom battle he had won, punctuating his sentences with loud, arrogant laughter. My sister, Jessica, was surrounded by our aunts, who were listening with rapt attention as she described a complex, life-saving surgical procedure she had performed last week. They were the stars of the show, the twin suns around which our family happily orbited. And I, as usual, was on the periphery. I made polite small talk. I helped my mother bring out platters of food. I played with my younger cousins. I was present, but I was invisible. The moment I had been dreading all day arrived around 4 p.m., after my father had had a few beers and was feeling particularly expansive and proud. He stood on the raised patio deck, clinking a beer bottle with a spoon to get everyone's attention. "All right, everyone, quiet down, he boomed, his voice full of a cheerful, self-satisfied authority. "I'd like to make a little toast. As I look out at all of you today, my family, my friends, my heart is full. This is what it's all about, family. And I have to say, I am the proudest man on earth." He raised his beer bottle and pointed it at my brother. "I look at my son, Mark," he said, his voice swelling with pride. "A partner at one of the biggest law firms in the state, a beautiful house, a wonderful family. He's a real success. He's a winner. I'm proud of you, son." A round of applause and cheerful shouts of "Hear, hear" went through the crowd. Mark gave a smug, kingly nod. "And my daughter, Jessica," my father continued, turning his gaze to my sister. "A surgeon, saving lives every single day. Respected, admired, one of the best in her field. She's a winner. I'm so proud of you." "Honey." More applause. Jessica beamed, lapping up the adoration. Then, my father's eyes scanned the crowd and landed on me. I was standing near the back, by the old oak tree. The crowd quieted down, a tense, awkward anticipation filling the air. What would he say about me, the art teacher? He looked at me, and his proud, beaming smile faltered, replaced by a look I knew all too well. It was a look of dismissive disappointment, of pity. He raised his beer bottle high in the air. "I look at my children," he declared to the entire silent party, to my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, "and I am so proud of what they have all become." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, and then, with a small, cruel shrug and a dismissive little laugh, he delivered the final, killing blow. "I'm proud of all my children, except the loser, Of course, cheers. Everyone. He took a long swig of his beer as a wave of shocked, uncomfortable silence washed over the backyard. It was broken by a few nervous, polite titters from his closest friends, and by a loud, triumphant laugh from my brother, Mark. The word hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. Loser. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a good-natured ribbing. It was a public declaration, a final, brutal judgment delivered by my own father in front of everyone I had ever known. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, searing wave that washed over me, making my face burn and my vision swim. I could feel every eye in the backyard on me, some with pity, some with morbid curiosity, some with the smug satisfaction of my siblings. My heart didn't just break in that moment, it shattered. The last, foolish, flickering hope I had ever held of one day earning his approval, his respect, was extinguished. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. A strange, cold, and terrible calm descended upon me. The peacemaker was gone. The hurt little girl was gone. All that was left was a quiet, empty numbness. I calmly walked through the stunned crowd. I went up to my mother, who was looking at me with a horrified, apologetic expression. I kissed her on the cheek. "Thank you for having me, Mom," I said, my voice a quiet, steady whisper that didn't sound like my own. "I have to go now." I turned and walked away. I walked through the house, my back straight, my head held high. I could feel their stares on my back, but it didn't matter anymore. Their opinions, their judgments, their entire world, it was all dead to me. I got into my 10-year-old car, the car they all secretly made fun of. I started the engine, and as I pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the party one last time. I saw my father, laughing with his friends, already moving on. I saw my siblings, preening in the glow of their father's approval. The loser was leaving, and she was never, ever coming back. The tears finally came as I drove. Hot and bitter, but underneath the immense, soul-crushing pain, something else was beginning to form. A tiny, hard, cold little ember of resolve. He had publicly disowned me. He had called me a loser, but he had no idea who I really was. He had no idea about the secret, heavy responsibility I carried for our entire family. He had no idea about the power I held. He was about to find out. I drove home from the reunion in a state of strange, cold clarity. The tears had dried. The deep, aching hurt in my chest had been cauterized by the white-hot fire of my father's public dismissal. He had drawn a line in the sand, and he had placed me firmly on the other side, the loser, the one exception to his pride, for my entire life. I had contorted myself into knots, trying to win a game that was rigged against me, the game of earning his approval, but he had just announced to the world that there was no way for me to win. So I decided to stop playing. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my small dining room table with a pot of strong, black coffee and a single, thick leather-bound folder. It was a folder that my grandmother, Eleanor, had given me 3 years ago, when her health first began to seriously decline. It contained the legal documents that had secretly defined my life, ever since her durable power of attorney and the full charter for the Eleanor Hayes Family Trust. I was the sole trustee. My successful siblings didn't want the burden. "It's too much paperwork," Mark had complained. "I don't have time to deal with all her bills," Jessica had whined. So the responsibility, as always, had fallen to me, the loser art teacher with the flexible schedule. They thought they were dumping a chore on me. They had no idea they were handing me the keys to their entire kingdom. I read through the trust documents again, my forensic accountant's mind. A part of me my family didn't know existed, taking over. The primary purpose of the trust was, of course, to pay for my grandmother's extensive care at the finest facility in the state. The bills were astronomical, but the trust was more than substantial enough to handle them. But there was another section, a section my siblings were intimately familiar with, even if they didn't know the mechanics of it. Section 5B, discretionary family stipends. My grandmother, a woman who had always been generous to a fault, had included a clause that allowed the trustee me to distribute funds to her grandchildren for the purpose of lifestyle and career support. It was this clause that had been quietly propping up my siblings' successful lives for the past 3 years. I knew because I was the one who approved the wire transfers, Mark's down payment on his massive house. It hadn't come from his law firm bonus. It had come from the trust, Jessica's medical research trip to Paris last summer. The one she had bragged about all over social media. It was a luxury vacation paid for by the trust. Their new cars, their designer clothes, their kids' expensive private school tuition. All of it was subsidized by the very grandmother whose care they couldn't be bothered to manage. They saw me as the poor art teacher, and I had let them. I let them believe it because it was easier, and because, on some level, I was just doing my duty, honoring my grandmother's wishes to see her grandchildren happy. But as I sat there, my father's word loser echoing in my head, I realized my silence had not been an act of kindness. It had been an act of enabling. It had allowed them to live a lie, to build their identities on a foundation of hypocrisy, all while looking down on me for my own honest, if modest, life. That was about to change. The decision, when it came, was not born of rage. It was born of a profound, surgical clarity. It wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of abdication. I was resigning from the role of the family peacemaker, resigning from the role of the secret keeper, resigning from the role of the unappreciated financial safety net. At precisely 9 a.m. the next morning, I made a phone call. "Mr. Abernathy, good morning," I said, when my grandmother's elderly estate lawyer answered. "This is Maya Hayes calling." "Maya, my dear," he said, his voice warm. "How are you holding up after the weekend? I heard the family reunion was eventful." Mr. Abernathy knew my family well. He had been dealing with them for 40 years. He knew the dynamics. "That's actually why I'm calling." "Mr. Abernathy," I said, my voice calm and professional. "I am calling to formally resign my duties as trustee of the Eleanor Hayes Family Trust and to relinquish my power of attorney for all of my grandmother's affairs." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Resign?" he finally asked, his voice full of shock. "Maya, you can't be serious. You are the sole trustee. There is no one else." "I understand that," I said. "However, due to severe and unforeseen personal circumstances, and for the preservation of my own emotional well-being, I am no longer able, in good conscience, to fulfill my fiduciary duties. My resignation is effective immediately." He was quiet for a long moment. I could hear him sigh, a sound of deep, weary understanding. "Maya," he said gently, "I won't ask for the details, but you must understand the immediate consequences of this action, as stipulated in the trust charter your grandfather and I wrote together decades ago." "I believe I do," I said, "but please, clarify them for me." "The moment you formally resign," he explained, "all discretionary powers of the trust are immediately frozen. All assets are to be secured. The primary care directive for Eleanor will, of course, continue to be funded automatically, but everything else, every stipend, every allowance, every pending transfer will stop. Instantly. The funds will be locked until a probate court can appoint a new trustee, a process which, given the complexity of your family, could take months, if not longer." "Yes, Mr. Abernathy," I said, a cold, quiet sense of calm settling over me. "I understand the consequences perfectly." "Very well," he said with another sigh. "I will file the necessary paperwork with the court this morning." "Maya, are you sure about this?" I thought of my father's face, twisted with disappointment. I thought of my siblings' smug, condescending smiles. I thought of the word loser. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," I said. I hung up the phone. It was done. I had pulled the pin on the financial grenade that had been propping up their entire lives. I had left the party. And now, I had just ensured that they would finally, truly, have to face the consequences. I didn't know how long it would take for them to feel the fallout. A day, a week. But I knew that the next phone call I received from my family would not be one of condescension or pity. It would be one of pure, unadulterated panic. The loser had just checkmated the entire board. The days following my resignation as trustee were the quietest I had known in years. I went to work. I taught my 7th graders how to throw a pot on a pottery wheel. I went for long walks. I painted. I felt a strange and profound sense of peace. A quiet that was a balm on my soul. It was the quiet before the storm. I knew the consequences of my actions were a tsunami, silently gathering force far out at sea. And it was only a matter of time before it made landfall on my family's comfortable, oblivious shores. I didn't have to wait long. The first tremor arrived via a phone call from my brother, Mark, on a Wednesday afternoon. His voice wasn't angry, not yet. It was just confused and deeply annoyed. The tone of a man whose ATM has just unexpectedly eaten his card. "Hey, Maya," he began, his voice a little too casual. "Weird question for you. Did you happen to talk to Mr. Abernathy about Grandma's trust lately? I was just on the phone with the bank. The wire transfer for the down payment on the new lake house. It got rejected. They said there's some kind of administrative freeze on the trust account. Do you know what that's about? The lake house. A massive, 7-bedroom monstrosity he was buying to further cement his status as the most successful lawyer in the county. A house he was buying, I knew, with a discretionary stipend from our grandmother's trust. I arranged my voice into a mask of polite ignorance. "Oh, that's strange, Mark," I said. "No, I haven't spoken to him. As you know, I'm no longer the trustee, so I really wouldn't know anything about it. I guess you'll have to call Mr. Abernathy yourself." "You're not the trustee anymore?" he asked, a new note of alarm in his voice. "What does that mean?" "It means exactly what it sounds like," I said sweetly. "I resigned. I have to go now. I'm in the middle of a class. Good luck with the house." I hung up, a small, cold smile on my face. The second tremor hit 2 days later. This one was from my sister, Jessica, the surgeon. She didn't bother with polite confusion. She went straight to frantic, accusatory rage. "Maya, what did you do?" she shrieked into the phone. "My grant for the medical symposium in Paris was just denied. The funding was coming from Grandma's foundation. They said the trust is frozen. I have non-refundable plane tickets. I have hotel reservations. You've ruined everything." Her medical research trip, I knew, was a week-long luxury shopping spree in Paris with 2 of her friends from the hospital, all paid for by the Eleanor Hayes Foundation for Medical Advancement. A sub-account of the main trust. "That sounds very stressful, Jessica," I said, my voice a calm, placid lake against her hurricane of fury. "But as I told Mark, I'm no longer the trustee. I have no control over the funds. It's completely out of my hands." "Out of your hands? This is your fault," she screamed. "You're just doing this to be vindictive, because you were upset about the reunion. You are so unbelievably selfish." "I'm selfish?" I asked. "Jessica, you're a surgeon with a salary well into the 6 figures. And you're screaming at me because a trust fund will no longer pay for your luxury vacation to Paris. And I'm the selfish one." I hung up on her while she was still screaming. The dominoes were beginning to fall, and it was beautiful to watch from a safe distance. I knew the full extent of their reliance on my grandmother's money, a reality they had so carefully hidden from the world, and even from themselves. Their entire lives were a facade, propped up by the very trust that I, the family loser, had been managing for them. Mark's monthly Porsche payment, Jessica's kids' exorbitant private school tuition, the mortgage on my parents' second home in Florida, the country club memberships, all of it was being paid for, or heavily subsidized, by the quiet, steady drip of funds from the Eleanor Hayes Family Trust. And now, the tap had been turned off. The final, desperate, panicked phone call came from my father on a Saturday morning. The rage was gone from his voice, replaced by a raw, naked terror that was far more satisfying. "Maya," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "What have you done?" "I did exactly what I said I would do, Dad," I replied, my voice even. "I resigned. I am no longer willing to be this family's manager, scapegoat, and secret keeper. But the money is frozen," he said, his voice cracking. "The bank just called. Mark is going to lose the lake house, and his deposit Jessica is going to lose thousands on her trip. Your mother and I. The payment for the club membership is due." He was finally telling the truth. He was finally admitting that their entire, glittering world was a house of cards. And I had just calmly, deliberately, pulled out the bottom one. "You have to fix this, Maya," he pleaded. All pretense of his patriarchal authority gone. He wasn't giving orders anymore. He was begging. "You are the only one who can. You have to call Abernathy." You have to tell him you've changed your mind. You have to take back control of the trust. I listened to him, to the desperation of the man who had called me a loser in front of our entire family just 1 week before. The man who had judged my life, my career, my very being, as a failure. He wasn't asking me to come back because he loved me. He was asking me to come back because he needed me. He needed the loser to come and fix his winner's mess. A profound sense of peace washed over me. The last of my anger, the last of my hurt, just dissolved. It was replaced by a quiet, unshakable strength. "Fix it," I asked, my voice soft, but full of a power he had never heard from me before. "Dad, there is nothing for me to fix. You, Mark, and Jessica are all incredibly successful adults with very important, high-paying jobs. You're all winners. I'm sure you will figure it out." I paused and delivered the final, liberating line. On the other hand, I'm just a loser middle school art teacher. I really can't help you. I have to go now. I have papers to grade. And I hung up the phone. I stood in my quiet, sun-filled apartment, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly, completely, and gloriously free. The consequences had landed. Their world was crumbling, and the one person who could save them was the daughter they had so carelessly, so cruelly, cast aside. The stage was set for their final act, and I knew they would be at my door soon, not to lecture, not to judge, but to beg. For 3 days after my father's panicked phone call, I lived in a state of quiet, unfamiliar peace. I turned my phone on silent. I went to work, taught my students how to mix the perfect shade of cerulean blue, and felt a lightness in my chest that I hadn't realized was missing. The crushing weight of my family's expectations, a burden I had carried my entire life, was gone. I had resigned. I was free. I knew the silence wouldn't last. Of course, I knew they would come. I was just surprised it took them so long. The knock on my apartment door came on a Saturday morning. It wasn't a loud, angry banging, but a series of hesitant, uncertain taps. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my paint-splattered jeans, and opened the door. All 3 of them were standing there in the hallway of my modest apartment building, my father, my brother Mark, and my sister Jessica. They didn't look angry. They looked pathetic. Their usual arrogance and confidence had been replaced by a pale, haggard desperation. They looked like a delegation from a bankrupt nation, coming to beg for a bailout. "Maya," my father began, his voice hoarse. Can we come in? We need to talk." I didn't answer right away. I just looked at them, letting them stand there in the hallway, letting them feel the shift in power. Finally, I stepped aside. "Fine," I said. They filed into my small, clean apartment, their expensive clothes looking completely out of place amongst my secondhand furniture and stacks of art books. They perched awkwardly on the edge of my sofa, a united front of shared desperation. "Maya," my father said again, wringing his hands, we made a mistake. A terrible mistake. Look, Maya." My brother Mark jumped in, ever the deal-maker. "What Dad said at the reunion, he was out of line. He was drinking. He didn't mean it. We're sorry." The apology was so weak, so transparently self-serving. I almost laughed. They weren't sorry for the years of disrespect. They were sorry they had gotten caught. They were sorry they had pushed me too far and were now facing the consequences. Sorry for what, exactly, I asked, my voice cool and even. I sat in my armchair opposite them, the queen in her modest castle. "Are you sorry for calling me a loser? Or are you sorry that the bank of Grandma is closed, and you're about to lose your new lake house?" Mark flinched as if I had struck him. "The sellers are threatening to sue me for the deposit." "Maya," he said, his voice a desperate whine. "They're going to ruin me." "And my trip to Paris," Jessica wailed. Her turn to plead. "The symposium, my reputation at the hospital will be destroyed. If I have to cancel, I've already told everyone I'm going." They laid out their litany of financial woes, a symphony of self-inflicted crises. The country club membership was due. The property taxes on my parents' second home in Florida were late. Their entire, glittering, successful world, I now realized, was a complete and total sham. A house of cards built on a foundation of my grandmother's money, which I had been quietly and thanklessly managing. Finally, My father looked at me, his eyes full of a desperate, pleading shame. "Please, Maya," he begged. The proud patriarch now reduced to a supplicant. "You're the only one who can fix this. You're the only one on the trust. Please, just call Mr. Abernathy. Tell him you made a mistake. Tell him you'll take it back. We'll do anything. We'll do anything." The words hung in the air for years. I had been the one willing to do anything to keep the peace, to earn their love. Now, the tables had turned so completely it was almost dizzying. I held all the power, and I was going to use it. "You want me to fix this?" I asked, looking at each of their desperate faces. "You want me to go back to being the responsible one, the family manager, the quiet loser who cleans up all your messes?" "Yes," my mother, who had been silent until now, cried from the speakerphone my father was holding. "Yes, darling, that's what family does." "Fine," I said. "I will fix it, but it will be on my terms, and they are absolute and non-negotiable." They all leaned forward, a wave of relief on their faces. They thought they had won. "First," I said, holding up a finger, "the apology. I want a real one, not a weak. I'm sorry you were offended apology. I want you to apologize for the years of disrespect, for dismissing my career, for making me feel small and worthless. I want to hear you say the words, 'We were wrong, all three of you.'" They stared at me, shocked. "Second," I continued, "financial transparency. If I resume my role as trustee, it will be as a real trustee. There will be no more secret stipends or quiet allowances. All distributions will cease immediately, from now on. You will all submit to a full financial audit by an accountant of my choosing. You will create a real, working budget, and if you need money from the trust, you will submit a formal, written request to me, detailing exactly what it's for, and I, and only I, will have the power to approve or deny it based on its merits." My brother's face went white. My sister looked like she was going to be sick. "And third," I said, my voice dropping, my gaze sweeping over all of them, "respect. That is the new family currency. You will respect my life. You will respect my career as an art teacher. You will respect my choices, the condescending jokes, the pitying looks, the helpful advice. It is over. If I hear one more word about my wasted potential, if I get one more backhanded compliment, the trust will be frozen again, permanently. I will let the state appoint a corporate trustee, and you can all deal with them, I assure you. They will be far less generous than I have been." I stood up, the finality of my terms hanging in the air. I had turned the tables completely. They had come to me, begging for a bailout, and I had given them a contract for their behavior. I looked at my father, at the man who had called me a loser just 1 week ago. "So," I asked, my voice cool and steady, "do we have a deal?" He just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. He was looking at his daughter, but he was seeing, for the very first time, his new boss. The silence in my small apartment living room was thick with the weight of my ultimatum. My father, my brother, and my sister, the three people whose opinions had shaped and constrained my entire life, stared at me. Their faces a mixture of shock, resentment, and the dawning, terrified realization that their world had been turned completely upside down. They had come here expecting me to crumble, to revert to my role as the family peacemaker. They had come expecting me to save them. They had no idea that my rescue would come with such a high price. My father was the first to break. The proud, booming patriarch, the man who had publicly branded me a loser, seemed to shrink before my very eyes. He slumped his shoulders in a gesture of utter defeat. "Yes, Maya," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper I had never heard from him before. "Yes, we have a deal." My brother, Mark, looked like he had just swallowed poison. He gave a short, angry, and completely powerless nod. Jessica just stared at me, her eyes wide with a horrified disbelief. But she nodded too. They had no other choice. "Good," I said, my voice cool and even. I wasn't gloating. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply in control. "Then let's start with term number 1. I leaned back in my armchair and clasped my hands. "The apology. I'm waiting." What followed was the most awkward, painful, and deeply satisfying 5 minutes of my life. I made them do it one by one. I made them look me in the eye. My father went first. Maya, he began, his voice thick with a shame so profound it was almost a physical thing. I am sorry. I was wrong. To say what I said at the reunion, it was a cruel, unforgivable thing. You are not a loser. You are my daughter, and I have not been a good father to you. I am sorry. Next, Mark. He could barely meet my gaze. I'm sorry, Maya, he mumbled, staring at the floor. For making fun of your job, for not respecting you. Look at me when you say it, Mark, I said calmly. He looked up, his eyes full of a resentful fury, but he did it. I'm sorry, he repeated. Then, Jessica. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears now streaming down her face. Not tears of remorse, I knew, but tears of humiliation. I'm sorry for not appreciating everything you do. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a magical movie moment where all our wounds were healed, but it was a start. It was an acknowledgement. It was a transfer of power, verbalized and witnessed. Thank you, I said, my voice still a flat, professional monotone. Now, for term number 2, the financials. I felt myself slip into the role they had always counted on. But this time, with the authority they had never granted me, I will call Mr. Abernathy tomorrow morning and resume my position as trustee. However, the freeze on all discretionary spending remains in effect. On Monday, I will expect a full financial disclosure from all 3 of you. Bank statements, credit card bills, loan documents, everything. My personal accountant will be conducting a full audit. After she has a clear picture of the mess you have collectively made, we will all sit down together and we will create a budget. A real one. There will be no more secret stipends. There will be no more loans for your vanity projects. Every major expenditure from the trust will require my written, final approval. Is that understood? They all just nodded numbly, like prisoners hearing their sentence. Good, I said. I stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. You can see yourselves out. They filed out of my small apartment, 3 ghosts of their former, arrogant selves. As my father passed me, he paused. Maya, he said, your grandmother. She would be very proud of you. Yes, I said, looking him right in the eye. I know, she was the one who taught me how to be strong. The year that followed was a slow, difficult, and necessary reconstruction, not just of my family's finances, but of our very foundation. I remained the trustee of my grandmother's estate, but my role was different now. I was not their safety net. I was their bank manager, and I was a very strict one. My brother, Mark, lost the lake house, but with a brutally enforced budget and a humbling part-time job, he had to take on weekends. He managed to save his own home. My sister, Jessica, had to cancel her trip to Paris, but she also learned, for the first time, how to live within her means. My parents had to sell their second home in Florida, a decision that pained them, but one that finally forced them to confront the reality of the irresponsible life they had been leading. Our family dinners are quiet now. The booming laughter and the smug pronouncements of success have been replaced by a hesitant, awkward respect. They speak to me differently, they ask for my opinion, and they actually listen to the answer. They don't call me a loser anymore. Now, they call me when they need advice. My father called me a loser because my life wasn't measured in the same loud, aggressive metrics as his. He didn't understand that strength isn't always a roar, sometimes. It's the quiet, steady, and thankless work of holding everything together. My strength was my secret, the one they took for granted until the moment they couldn't live without it. They thought their insults made me weak, but in the end, they just gave me a reason to finally show them my strength, and the consequence for them, their entire future, their entire legacy, is now being managed by the one daughter they never valued. The loser is now in charge, and I have to admit, it's a job I'm surprisingly good at.